Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and this week we are focusing on energy, and we're going to get into a pretty big discussion all week long talking Proposition 112, but I have a guest in studio here with me, Tracee Bentley. She's the Executive Director of Colorado Petroleum Council. How are you doing, Tracee?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, of course. It's always a pleasure to have you in studio and talk with us, and energy is one of our big areas that we focus on. It's very important in Colorado, and particularly with oil and gas, right?
Absolutely. Colorado's we make 5 in natural gas production and 7 in oil. So we're in the top 10 producing states in the entire country.
Yes, which is amazing. Yes. And a lot of jobs right on that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So give us a little bit of your background. It's been a little bit since we've had you in studio last. So what have you been up to, and how did you get to Executive Director?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a 5th generation Colorado native.
Oh, wow.
Born and raised, and obviously generations before me were as well. I grew up in the mountains and in a very rural part of Colorado. My family farmed in the San Luis Valley. My dad was a farmer and my mom was a prison warden, so I had very strong, interesting parents, and still do. And so I did some time in D.C. in between my freshman and sophomore year in college and kind of fell in love with politics, although I was always inclined that way. I loved student government and that kind of thing. Went to D.C. though and really got hooked. Came back after a couple years on the Hill, got both my degrees at CSU, went to work for the Colorado Farm Bureau, then opened up my own consulting business, and then went to work for Governor Hickenlooper for about 4 years in various areas. My final position with Governor Hickenlooper was legislative director and senior advisor on energy and agriculture. And that's where I really started to fall in love with the oil and gas industry, and I figured that that would be a wonderful place for me to land. And lo and behold, API opened up a Colorado office and asked me to join them, so here I am.
Wonderful. And I assume working in oil and gas is, it's maybe not got a whole lot of women in leadership roles. And so that's exciting that you get to do that and be in a leadership role in the oil and gas industry.
You are exactly right. One of the goals of our industry is, in fact, to recruit and retain more women and minorities. But right now, we got a lot of work to do. So I consider myself a leader in that area, and I speak about it as much as I possibly can.
Yes, and I got the chance to go to, you had an event at Tracee a while ago for the LGBTQ community, right? And oil and gas. And it's not something you would necessarily think that would coincide, but there are a lot of LGBTQ individuals and communities within the gas industry, right? It's cool. It was a really cool event.
Well, thank you. And you're exactly right. So we have a diverse workforce, even though we need to continue to diverse. But right here in Denver, in our community, we have a good diverse workforce. And so I wanted to make sure, I wanted to create a space for that diversity to be able to talk openly and feel like they are loved within the broader oil and gas community. And so that was the purpose of the event. And it's something I look forward to every year.
Oh, and it was, I was so happy to be able to go. So I definitely will mark that on my calendar every year as well. But I think one of my favorite parts of that panel, you asked the question, was it harder to talk to your family about coming out, or was it harder to tell your friends and family that you were working in the oil and gas industry?
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's sad that I had to ask that question, but it's one you were there and you heard the answers.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, many of them said, it's harder to tell my friends that I work in the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
And I think, Alex, that speaks to where we're at right now in conversations about this and other hard topics, certainly. But
sure.
Oil and natural gas, and I got to tip, being a 5th generation Coloradan, I've never seen this before. If you know anything about Colorado and our heritage, there was oil and gas production in the state before Colorado was an actual state. That's how long the two have coincided here. And I feel like the conversations that we're having right now are the conversations that we're not having. It's not the Colorado way. Right. So we need to make sure that we bring it back to a place where people can have a good give and take without, personal threats, without the extreme rhetoric. And I feel like as Coloradans, we need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is extreme rhetoric out there. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? And I know that one of the big issues that we're facing is this above-board energy, right? Just because you support oil and gas doesn't mean that you don't support wind and solar energy, right? I think a lot of times they coincide, and people should be more open-minded.
You're spot on. Colorado is really the only state that I know. There are others who have multiple sources of energy, but we are an all of the above state, and we should celebrate that and we should brag about it. We rank high in hydro, solar, and wind, and of course we're a top producer of oil and natural gas. We're also fairly high in coal, so that we shouldn't have to choose. In fact, we don't have to choose. We should celebrate all of them. But going back to your point, the two absolutely go together. So solar panels are they're a petroleum product. Wind turbines are a petroleum product. And when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, those are backed up by natural gas, clean burning natural gas. And so this notion that we can go 100% renewable energy, or quite honestly that we should be 100% natural gas, it doesn't make sense for Colorado. We are the second cheapest electricity rates in the country. And that is because of our huge natural gas portfolio. We're also able to onboard a lot of renewables because we have cheap natural gas to back it up. So I mean, we're in an awesome spot right now.
We really are. And so one of the things that we are having a challenge with is this Proposition 112, if you don't mind if we jump right into
Absolutely.
that conversation. So Proposition 112 is asking for all wells to be 2,500 feet from any school or building, right, at any entity, really, that's in the way. And 2,500 feet is large, right? And we're talking all the way around. I think that's one thing that a lot of people, it's not just a straight line. We're talking a circumference of 2,500 feet.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and this is really tough for us. So it would essentially shut down any future wells.
It would. It would take 85% of land out of production in this state. So that is effectively a ban. And let me go back to you were just describing what the measure would do.
Yeah.
Not only would it be 2,500 foot from any occupied structure, it would be from any vulnerable area. And the way that the proponents have described vulnerable are dry creek beds, any place that's vulnerable, right? Well, that means different things to everybody. And so, but that is on purpose. So a dry creek bed, by the way, most of Colorado at one time had water flowing through it or very, very close to it. So that you can see it takes off the 85% of the landmass. And the landmass that it does leave open are quite frankly areas where there aren't vast minerals. So this was absolutely done on purpose, and it was meant to serve as a ban.
Well, and the verbiage, anytime you look at verbiage when it comes to a proposition or an amendment, right, it's tough to follow. But disguising it, specifically using the term vulnerable for that to be subject to whomever is reading that,
right,
is not fair.
It's not fair at all, but it wasn't meant to be fair. The language was purposely written so that it would sound reasonable to voters when they read it. They said, that sounds reasonable. But we're working really hard to educate people on the devil's in the details. First of all, what is 2,500 feet? To your point, that's a huge amount of land when you take it from the point. And second of all, the vulnerable and occupied structures. I mean, that's roughly everything in our state.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So, you know, I've had several people on to talk about 112, and I find it fascinating that neither Walker Stapleton or Jared Polis are on board for this Proposition 112, and they both have very different views on what energy looks like, right? And it's fascinating that neither one of them are supporting this proposition.
I think it's very telling. I have an article in one of the newspapers today, and my ending line is, the one thing that Proposition 112 does is drive both sides together. And your point is exactly right. We have Jared Polis, who is calling for 100% renewable energy, electricity-wise, by 2030 or something, and then we've got Ken Salazar, I'm sorry, Walker Stapleton, who is, I don't think he's anti-renewables, but he's not calling for 100% renewables, so he has a very different take on energy. And the two are both equally as strong, saying no on 112. We've got Ken Salazar, former Secretary of Interior and Attorney General here, and Bill Owens, former Republican governor, both saying this is bad for Colorado. I could go Governor Hickenlooper saying no. Our list of elected officials who are saying no on 112, I think we're up to almost 200. So this is maybe the only ballot initiative where we have D's and R's saying this is bad for Colorado, vote no. So that I think that's telling.
Yeah, and let's get into the exactly why it's bad for Colorado. I know one of the things that there are so many jobs associated with oil and gas, right? And not just directly in oil and gas. There's also entities that are impacted by the oil and gas industry throughout Colorado. So if you don't mind talking a little bit about the employee situation and what that would look like if we did get this passed.
Absolutely. So statewide, indirectly, we have 232,000 jobs associated with oil and gas, or we're about 6.5% of the of Colorado's economy. That's a big chunk. We contribute $31 billion a year to Colorado's economy, of which a huge portion of that is obviously taxes. 220 just goes to schools, to give you an example of the kind of what we're talking about. If 112 were to pass, in the very first year of passage alone, 43,000 jobs would go away, and that's just in year one. We would take a $230 million tax hit just in year one. And these are taxes that go directly to our parks, our police, our fire departments, roads, healthcare. I mean, these are services that people depend on, that we absolutely must have. And without raising taxes somewhere else, nobody can tell us where that revenue is going to be made up from. So I think voters in the state of Colorado could expect taxes are going to have to be raised somewhere if oil and gas is penalized and eventually run out of town. Here's the other thing that I will tell you is that this isn't just about oil and gas, and I think that's really important for people. So of the job loss I just spoke about, only 77% of that job loss would not even be in the oil and gas sector. So we're talking about 16,000 retail jobs would go away, 12,000 healthcare jobs would go away, 10,000 construction jobs, 9,000 hotel and food service jobs, 9,000 government jobs, and 6,000 real estate jobs, just to name a few.
Wow. I didn't realize that it impacted that many industries outside of oil and gas. I knew it was big, but I didn't realize it was that big. And it's really hard to think about. That drives that home, I think, for me. Gosh, this one is so tough. I don't know why you would vote yes for 112. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around why people would want to vote for this. The only thing I can think of is for going 100% renewables, which, as we know, isn't realistic.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things on why would people vote yes. Number one, you just have that small but loud, and they are very small, but loud contingency of keep it in the ground folks, right? And those are the folks behind this measure. Now they're going to tell you it's about health and safety and we don't want oil and gas in and around, our homes and all that. False. Because we negotiate every day on appropriate measures to stay back, not only from occupied structures, but from neighborhoods. I mean, that's what we do, and we do it very well. So these people are not reasonable. These are keep it in the ground. They just don't like oil and gas. So we have to start there. So there's some people, not very many Coloradans, but some people are there. But I think the largest folks, or the largest contingency of folks in Colorado that we're talking to, don't understand that this serves as a ban. People don't understand how large 2,500 feet is, and they don't understand that if you apply that statewide, it serves as a ban. Now, we also show that once we educate them, they say, oh, I don't want that. That's too extreme. So our challenge is getting to every voter, or as many as we possibly can, and explaining this to them. And that's what we're doing right now.
Yes, and we are happy to be able to provide that platform for you.
Thank you.
And of course, everyone should do their own research, right? Definitely read about it yourself and understand what you're getting into. With the 2,500 feet, I have to ask, we've done this before. We had some setback measures done before, right? If it came down to it and it did pass, what are those structures going to look like?
Sure. So in the past, we've had similar ballot measures get close to making the ballot, but we haven't had one until now actually collect the amount of signatures needed to make the ballot. So This is the first time voters will see it on their ballot.
Gotcha.
But to your point, if 112 were to pass, along with all the devastating economic impacts that I just explained, the regulatory uncertainty would be at an all-time high. And when you have 85% of the land taken off the table, you can imagine what industry would really be excited about staying in a state that essentially just said you're not valued here, even though you bring all the jobs and economic impact and charitable contributions to our state. We're voting you out basically. And so there are states who would love to have our companies go there and do business, and they don't have near the strict regulatory environment or rules that we have here. And so I think industry, you would see them voluntarily, finish up the projects that they had in the ground before the proposition and then probably go somewhere else. And you really can't blame them.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, gosh. Let's talk a little bit about health and safety, right? Because that's what has been driving behind this Proposition 112. There's been quite a bit of research that's been done on the health and safety side that doesn't quite line up, right?
I think that's a really nice way to put it. So the opposition lists all these studies that have come out and said it's not safe, or it's not, your health is in jeopardy should you be close to an oil and gas site. And the fact is, none of those studies are credible. Many, or the vast majority of them, end their study by saying, but we just took a very small sample size, or we were able to draw only a handful of conclusions and more study needs to be done. Almost in every single case. In fact, in one case that came out of, sadly, our own University of Colorado Boulder, they took the air samples right next to one of the busiest highways on the western slope. That's where they air sampled. Well, of course the air sampling is going to come back probably unhealthy for people to stand by. Who's going to stand by a busy highway and sit there, for hours and breathe that in? So you can see the tactics that are used when they produce these studies. And we refute them every chance we get. And have done our own third-party studies, but people shouldn't take industry's word for it.
Right.
They should take the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, who every single time, while the opposition does a couple hundred sample sizes, CDPHE's did 10,000 samples in the state of Colorado and came back and said there is no health or safety risk when it comes to being around oil and gas development. I mean, I don't know how much more unbiased and clear that could be.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's written right there,
yes.
Black and white ink for you. Is there any reason that all the signs are there for me to vote no on this. And you've done extensive research on your own with your own company. You've got dozens of entities that are backing you up on that. Anything else that really drives this point for you to vote no?
Sure. One thing that I like to tell people, and myself included, I work in the oil and natural gas industry, and my kids have to breathe the same air as everybody else's. I care about my family, friends, and neighbors just like everybody else. And so if our industry wasn't safe, we have to live there too, right? And so, of course, we're going to do everything in our power, and we do, and we will continue to do, to make sure our communities are safe, because, once again, we live there too. I like to tell people that I'm a mom of 3. I've raised 3 kids in Weld County, almost right in the heart of oil and gas county. And at one point in time, I had 3 rigs a couple thousand feet from my house, and one less than that. I have perfectly healthy, wonderful kids who love where they were raised, right around oil and gas. And my kids grew up around oil and gas. They had the benefit of great schools and great roads. And we live in a county that, thanks to oil and gas, is debt-free. And so I like to tell people when I get accused of, well, how do you know? It's easy for you to say, you work in an office in Denver. Nope. I talk the talk and I walk the walk, and I have and I do. And I'm proud of that, and my kids are proud of that. And so I think I'm one of many, many examples of, I wouldn't ask somebody to do what I'm not willing to do.
Exactly. I love that. Thank you. That was very well said. And so Proposition 112, obviously, please do your own research, but there's tons of evidence and tons of advice, or tons of research that's been done proving that it's not ideal for Colorado.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants more information, go to protectcolorado.org, and you'll find all you can read and then some about Proposition 112.
Wonderful. Well, let's switch gears a little bit for these last few minutes, and we'll talk a little bit about the Colorado Petroleum Council and everything that you guys have going on in your world right now. Obviously, Prop 112 is a big project that I'm sure you guys are working on. But besides that, what else is new?
My goodness. So Colorado Petroleum Council, for those who don't know, we represent the oil and gas industry here in Colorado, and represent our members really at every level. So we work, of course, at the legislature. We work at the regulatory level, both at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and really any other agency that has any reign, if you will, or domain over the oil and gas industry. We also work at the local level, and then we certainly work among diversified communities, and that there's a lot of charitable work that goes into there. So we touch everything that has to do with this industry, and so it's a very, very busy time. Not just on the negative side when we're talking about Prop 112 and some other things. There's so many amazing, wonderful, positive things going on out there. Our companies and Colorado Petroleum Council work really hard where if we identify a constituency or an area or a town that's in need, we try really hard to rally, our industry does, and give them support in what they need. And that's probably one of the favorite parts, my favorite parts of my job. Our industry is very, very generous. And when they see somebody in need, they're usually the first people right there. So as we've seen various tragic incidents across our state, industry, we make sure that we get there and that we're there to support, whether or not they're an oil and gas family or not. So that's one amazing thing that I'm proud of my companies for. The other part, going back to the regulatory issues, is I think it's important for people to understand, right now as we speak, we are involved in 13 rulemakings. That's unprecedented.
Wow.
The only other state that's close to us in the country as far as current rulemakings is a Midwestern state, and I think they have 4 or 5.
Wow.
So when folks say this industry needs to be regulated more, which is what the proponents of 112 say, I say not only do we have hands down the strictest set of regulations and rules in the country, we have more than anybody else. The fact that I'm involved and my staff are involved in 13 right now should be very telling. And that's everything from, we're still tightening down air regulations, and we have the toughest air regulations anywhere in the country. We are the first, and we're still the toughest, and we're continuing to ratchet down. And by the way, willingly, we're sitting at the table saying we will continue to do more, whether it's voluntarily or if we need to tweak something, a rule that was recently passed. We're sitting there working very hard on it, all the way from we passed new flow line regulations earlier this year, and we're continuing to refine those and make sure that those are exactly where they need to be. We are talking about pooling, statutory pooling. Industry willingly put a bill forward this past session that says, you know what, our pooling laws maybe were a little outdated. I think they were written in the 80s, so let's bring them up to speed. And it's something that our opponents have been saying we've been unwilling to do for years. This year we proactively wrote a bill, put it on the table, worked with both sides of the aisle, and passed it. So we're going through a rulemaking right now to refine that too. And I could go on, but this is these are important things that nobody's hearing about.
And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's a lot that I didn't realize. And I knew that we were one of the strictest. I didn't realize we were the strictest in the nation. And we have a beautiful state, right? I've been all over this country, and I have to say that Colorado is probably one of my favorite places ever. And I am a little biased. I do live here, right? I chose to stay here because of the mountains and the beauty that we have. And I think one of the things that people don't realize a lot of times is how much oil and gas puts right back into the environment.
You are exactly right. 2 things there. We are at an all-time high production levels. We're seeing production levels like we haven't seen in a very, very long time. So production is soaring upwards. Emissions are soaring downwards. We're also at a 30-year low when it comes to emissions. And this is due to a couple of things. Number 1, the technology the industry is using right now. It's amazing, the technology that we're using. Number 2, Colorado's rules. And number 3, natural gas is clean burning. And when you take it off the wellhead, you capture it all, you put it back in that pipeline with technology and our rules. I mean, that is a win across the board. The other thing I'll say about that, because I'm so proud of Colorado. Just like, the Rocky Mountains and all the things you think about when you're Colorado, oil and gas is the same thing to Colorado. As I said before, the oil and gas production was here before Colorado was declared a state. It has been going on forever and ever and ever. And we are a huge part of this economy, and we're a huge part, honestly, of America's energy independence. Just think about that. We're a key player in America being independent right now. And I think we should take pride in that. We have the toughest rules in the country, so we have the cleanest oil and gas being produced right here. We can easily say that. And we're contributing to America's energy independence. It doesn't get any better than that.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you so much, Tracee Bentley, for joining me today. And be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube page while you're here, and find out more information at api.org.
api.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.